They laughed when she walked onto the base in jeans and a visitor badge until the nuclear submarine surfaced just for her. The naval base at Port Jackson buzzed with activity that morning. But all eyes eventually landed on a quiet blonde woman in her late 30s, dressed in a simple blouse, jeans, and a faded military pin. Emily Parker looked more like someone's wife than anyone who belonged on a military installation. To the officers gathered for a high-level submarine defense briefing, she was an anomaly, a civilian woman stepping into sacred territory. Commander Richard Blake, a career Navy man with a chip on his shoulder and a disdain for outsiders, led the charge of skepticism. To him, Emily was just another case of stolen valor, maybe wearing her father's medals. But there were signs, subtle, disquieting signs that something about Emily didn't fit their assumptions. When she passed through security, doors requiring top clearance opened automatically. The room's biometric climate control subtly adjusted to submarine combat settings when she entered. And then there was her silence. Calm, measured, almost tactical. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain. She simply watched, observed, calculated, as the group mocked her pin, dismissed her presence, and cracked jokes dripping with sexism. Emily sat perfectly still. Her breathing slowed, like someone trained for high-pressure submarine dives. Her eyes tracked the exit points, the sonar charts, and every person in the room. Her fingertips tapped a subtle Morse code on the table. DEEP. Commander Blake, growing irritated by her composure, finally stood and tried to remove her. That's when she spoke just one line. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." "Commander." The authority in her voice cut through the room like a sonar ping. The atmosphere shifted, and before Blake could respond, the door burst open. Admiral Catherine Monroe, a legend in her own right, entered, eyes widening in disbelief. "My God." "Emily." Her voice trembled, her face drained of color. Every head in the room turned. A silence fell. Monroe didn't hesitate. "Gentlemen," she said firmly, "meet Lieutenant Commander Emily Parker. Call sign, Ghost 23. The room gasped. That name, Ghost 23, was spoken in hushed tones across submarine fleets. The woman who had taken the USS Nevada 3,000 feet below the surface to intercept a nuclear threat. The woman whose protocols still lived in every submarine system in the fleet. They'd mocked a war hero, and the systems knew her before they did. The silence that followed Admiral Monroe's revelation wasn't just from shock, it was from shame. The officers who had been so quick to mock Emily Parker now stood frozen, their laughter extinguished in an instant. Commander Blake's jaw clenched, his face pale as the weight of realization settled in. This wasn't some civilian tagging along on a tour. This was Ghost 23. The one submariners whispered about during long deployments. The one who had rewritten everything they thought they knew about courage beneath the waves. But Emily didn't bask in the moment. She didn't correct anyone. She didn't scold. She simply turned her eyes back to the tactical screen on the far wall, studying it as if the room hadn't just imploded on itself. Her silence spoke volumes. Her body remained perfectly still, but her mind was clearly running decades ahead of theirs. As Commander Blake tried to regain control of the room, Emily quietly pointed out 3 critical flaws in their current submarine defense strategy. Her voice was calm, but surgical. Sector 7 leaves a sonar gap. Your response time to a fast attack sub is too slow, and your backup comms protocol, it's outdated by 5 years. Her words struck harder than any rank ever could. The room fell quiet again, this time with a different energy respect mixed with discomfort. Officers who had been snickering minutes earlier now took out notepads. Lieutenant Hayes, the one who'd mocked her pin, couldn't meet her eyes. The systems in the room began responding to her voice, subtly adjusting interfaces and configurations as if recognizing a long-lost operator. The sonar display even flashed a message. "Welcome back, Ghost 23. Emily's pin, once the center of ridicule, now glinted under the overhead light. Admiral Monroe took a moment to explain. That pin was hand-forged from the hull of the Nevada, a gift from her fiancé, Lt. Mark Taylor, before he died, saving the reactor. Every eye turned to Emily again, their mockery now transformed into reverence. The pin wasn't a decoration. It was a memorial, but Emily didn't break. Her eyes remained dry. Her voice remained even. "We're not here to talk about the past. I'm here to make sure it doesn't happen again." The room shifted. No longer a space of exclusion, it had become a classroom, and the quiet woman they had all dismissed. She was now their lead instructor and their last line of defense. Just as the weight of Emily's revelation began to settle in, a sharp, shrill alarm shattered the stillness of the room. Red lights flared along the ceiling panels. A naval technician burst through the door. Pale and breathless, unidentified acoustic signature detected. 60 miles off the eastern seaboard. Possible foreign sub. High probability hostile. Instantly, the conference room transformed into a war room. Officers scrambled to terminals, the atmosphere thick with urgency. But amid the chaos, Emily Parker remained composed. Her eyes narrowed, not in fear, but in focus. Commander Blake froze. This wasn't a simulation anymore. This was real. His instincts screamed to follow standard protocol. But deep down, he knew protocol wasn't going to be enough. He glanced at Emily. For a brief second, their eyes met. That was all it took. "Execute her orders," he barked to his team. Without hesitation, Emily stepped forward, hands gliding over the control table with eerie precision. The system, which had been dormant seconds before, instantly lit up under her touch. Her biometrics were still registered in the command interface. A message appeared on the central screen. "Command access granted, Ghost 23. Adjust heading to 270 degrees. Depth to 1.0 feet. Activate narrow beam sonar. Stand by for tactical overlay," she said, her voice steady, clear, and unmistakably authoritative. Every syllable carried the weight of experience. The officers, previously skeptics, now moved in sync under her direction. The AI responded with startling speed, displaying sonar feedback, threat vectors, and counter-maneuver options Emily hadn't even spoken yet. It was as if the system had been waiting for her return. From the central screen, an image of the enemy sub shimmered into view. Emily's mind calculated distance, speed, and escape trajectory faster than anyone else in the room. They're running silent, trying to hug the thermal layer. "If we force them into deeper water, they lose stealth advantage," she explained. She wasn't improvising, she was predicting. Her fingers tapped in the ghost maneuver, an evasive tactic so precise and dangerous, it was believed to be impossible to execute outside simulation. Yet here she was, guiding them through it in real time. Minutes felt like hours, and then silence. Target evaded, threat neutralized. "No engagement necessary," came the final system message. A collective exhale swept through the room. They hadn't just avoided disaster, they'd witnessed a master at work. The woman they doubted had just saved the Eastern Fleet from a potential catastrophe. Commander Blake stepped back, stunned. Emily hadn't said, "I told you so." She didn't need to. She'd let her actions do the talking, and they'd spoken louder than any uniform ever could. The danger had passed, but the emotional gravity in the room remained heavy. Officers who had once questioned Emily Parker's very presence now stood in silent awe, their shoulders slightly hunched, as if trying to shrink under the weight of their own assumptions. Commander Blake, no longer the loudest voice in the room, stepped back, his posture less rigid, more human. Admiral Monroe approached Emily slowly, her voice no longer that of a commanding officer, but of someone carrying a deep and personal regret. "I should have fought harder for your recognition," she said quietly. "We failed you." Emily offered a small nod, her eyes calm but distant. "The mission was classified. You did what you could," she replied, her voice still steady, but wrapped in layers of unspoken pain. The officers listened as Monroe revealed what many in the room had only heard as rumor. Operation Silent Thunder, 2019. A North Korean submarine with a nuclear payload had nearly slipped undetected through international waters. Emily, then Lieutenant Commander Parker, had manually overridden protocol and taken the USS Nevada deeper than any submarine had ever gone. She held position in a thermal shadow zone, hidden from sonar, saving the entire carrier group above. The risk was astronomical, the toll deeply personal. Among the 3 crew members lost that day was Lieutenant Mark Taylor, Emily's fiancé. He died saving the reactor. Before deployment, he had given her a custom-forged pin made from the hull's inner plating. engraved with the silhouette of a submarine, and the words, "Ghost 23, come back to me." She did. He didn't. For years, Emily wore that pin not for honor, not for recognition, but as a quiet vow to carry his legacy forward. The room, once dripping with mockery, had transformed into a space of reverence. Lieutenant Hayes, who had earlier joked about her insignia, now avoided her gaze, visibly shaken. The same officers who had rolled their eyes were now scribbling notes, their respect earned not by rank, but by relentless competence. Blake, humbled, stood before her. "I was wrong," he admitted, "about everything." His voice cracked. "You didn't just belong here, you led the room." Emily didn't respond immediately. Then, finally, respect is earned. "Commander, let's hope we both remember that." In that moment, every unspoken judgment, every whispered insult, dissolved, not because they had been corrected, but because they had been outclassed. Ghost 23 hadn't just saved their base, she had forced them to confront their blind spots, their egos, and the limits of what they thought leadership looked like. And none of it required her raising her voice. In the days that followed, Naval Command formalized what had become undeniable. Emily Parker would remain embedded at Port Jackson as the lead tactical consultant for submarine warfare. Though she wore no uniform, no rank on her collar, every officer on base now deferred to her insight as if she were a sitting admiral. The shift wasn't just organizational, it was cultural. The chain of command had bent, quietly, to make room for someone who operated far beyond its traditional boundaries. She didn't ask for authority. She never demanded respect. She simply earned it through flawless strategy, battle-tested intuition, and a level of emotional control that made even the most seasoned commanders take note. Commander Blake, once her harshest critic, had become her most determined student. He asked questions, now real ones, about sonar gaps, about asymmetric warfare, about what it meant to make impossible decisions underwater. With lives and nuclear consequences balanced on a razor's edge, Emily answered every inquiry with the same measured tone, never lording her experience over anyone. But her words carried weight. Even the simulation AI systems responded differently in her presence. Base protocols had quietly updated to include her tactical models. Across the fleet, her emergency maneuver, once considered too risky to even train, was now hard-coded into U.S. Navy submarines under the unofficial name, the Ghost Protocol. 17 submarines had already avoided disaster thanks to it. Her presence didn't just reshape the room. It reshaped how leadership was understood. It wasn't in barked orders or medals. It was in foresight, in presence, in silent, practiced conviction. Admiral Monroe pulled her aside one evening, watching her work late over a glowing chart of enemy submarine patterns. "You know," she said softly, "there are men in that room who would follow you into the deepest trench without a second thought." Emily didn't look up. "They'll never have to," but perhaps the most haunting presence in her orbit wasn't military. It was personal. That small pin on her lapel, the one everyone once laughed at, had become the quiet symbol of her story. Forged from the hull of the USS Nevada, engraved by the man who gave everything. It was both armor and wound. She wore it every day, not as a medal but as a vow. Her grief remained private, her healing incomplete, but her mission never wavered. She had returned not for validation, but to prevent the same mistakes that had cost her everything. And though she would fade into the shadows again, moving from base to base, the fleet would feel her presence in the way systems ran sharper. Teams trained harder, and lives were saved silently. That was her legacy, not in history books, but in the lives that never made the headlines, because she kept them safe. The sun was beginning its slow descent beyond the Atlantic, casting long golden streaks across the docks at Port Jackson Naval Base. The base was quiet now. The chaos had passed. The lessons had been learned. And Emily Parker, in her jeans and plain gray jacket, walked alone toward the main gate. No medals were pinned to her chest. No parade waited. But the silence that surrounded her wasn't empty. It was reverent. At every checkpoint she passed, security personnel straightened instinctively, not because of protocol, but because they now understood. The systems didn't ask her for ID. Doors unlocked before she reached them. Scanners lit green as she approached. recognizing a presence hardwired into their deepest security layers. As she neared the final gate, something stirred in the distance. A low rumble rolled across the water. Slowly, almost ceremonially, a nuclear submarine surfaced from the depths of the harbor. Its massive black hull broke the surface like a leviathan rising to honor one of its own. It wasn't scheduled. It wasn't protocol. It was personal. On the conning tower, the submarine's commander, dressed in full uniform, stood at attention. Through the periscope, he could see her, the woman whose voice, years ago, had saved his predecessor's crew from certain death. The woman whose tactical decisions now guided the entire fleet. He raised his hand in a solitary, formal salute. Emily stopped. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She simply returned the gesture with military precision, a single, silent motion of profound weight. The submarine began to descend, disappearing beneath the waves, taking its salute with it. But the message was clear. It had not surfaced for rank or ceremony. It had surfaced for her. From a distance, Commander Blake watched from the edge of the pier, his posture different now, no longer inflated by ego, but grounded in understanding. He finally saw it, the quiet force that had stood among them all along, underestimated, uncelebrated, and yet unshakable. Emily's name would never make headlines. Her story would remain classified. But every officer in that room, every sailor in that fleet, would remember what she had done and how she did it. She didn't need a title. She didn't demand respect. She simply earned it. As she disappeared beyond the gates, a whisper passed through the base, spreading from one sailor to the next. Ghost actual, off deck. And with that, Lieutenant Commander Emily Parker faded once again into quiet anonymity, her mission unfinished, her presence unforgettable. Because sometimes, the most dangerous person in the room is the one who says nothing at all.